Welcome, my friends, to episode 36 of the Josh Scanlon podcast. It is a bright and sunny Friday, May 11th, 2018. And today I'm going to have a follow-up on the topic of C.S. Lewis I talked about yesterday from his book, The Screwtape Letters. Yeah, it's got nothing to do with finances. Actually, when you think about it, it's more important than finances because it's about your soul. And a lot of things people, in particular in a prosperous society like we are, seem to have fallen for the affluenza issue of illness, which is, I'm going to buy these things, will make my life better. And they buy and they buy and buy. A lot of times they'll buy on debt, and their lives are actually less fulfilled, less satisfying, and they've lost their way. And I truly believe that's by design. That's what the evildoers want you to follow. They want you to follow this unfulfilled life that if you just get more and more and more, you'll be happier at some point. And you're just never going to be. You're just never going to be. And happiness can only be found on the inside looking out, not the outside looking in. And for me, that's where C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, was just so revolutionary to me. And trust me. Oh, man, I'm a big sinner. I got lots of issues to contend with, as we all do as human beings. Just because you find your way to peace internally is always a forever battle, which is why I always got to read C.S. Lewis's book, because the battle is ongoing. It's never won. It's kind of like an alcoholic. What they say when you go to AA is you just need to be sober for today. You're always an alcoholic. You're never not an alcoholic. And today the battle is just as strong for you as it was yesterday. It'll be just as strong as tomorrow, but you can't control tomorrow. You can only control today. So as long as you don't take that drink today, you'll be fine. And if you don't take that drink in this minute, you'll be fine. Can't worry about tomorrow. Can't worry about the past. And that's why I like C.S. Lewis's, because it's the same thing. The battle is always on. Whatever happened in the past, you can't control. So forgive yourself, forgive yourself, forgive yourself. God forgives you, my friends, of what you've done in the past. How dare you are to say, I can't forgive myself, when God will do that. He says explicitly. All you got to do is get on your knees and ask for forgiveness, and God will provide it. If he can do it, the creator of all of seen and unseen, if God can forgive you regardless of what you've done, how dare you say you can't forgive yourself? Forgive yourself. It's the first step into self-fulfillment and the peace inside your heart. Money won't solve that. Money will just paper over it. That's it. Money won't do it. That's what we say in Christian apologetic circles. We're suffering from affluenza. We have too much prosperity. Thus, we feel we don't need God. But you do. All right. So I'm just going to, I don't know if I'll read this whole chapter. I might divide it up into two, but for me, I just, I don't know, some reason you feel God put you on this world to say something, the world to say something. So I'm going to say it. So we're going to go back to Screwtape Letters. This is the epilogue, or the back matter, I guess, not the foreword, the epilogue. I'm not sure what the opposite of foreword is, but the scene is in hell at the annual dinner of the Tempters Training College for Young Devils. The principal, Dr. Slubgob, has just proposed the health of the guest, Screwtape, who is a guest of honor. He rises to reply, Mr. Principal, your eminence, your disgraces, my thorns, shadies, and gentle devils. It is customary on these occasions for the speaker to address himself chiefly to those among you who have just graduated and will soon be posted to the official tempterships on earth. It is a custom I willingly obey. I well remember with what trepidation I awaited my own first appointment. I hope and believe that each of you has the same uneasiness tonight. Your career is before you. Hell expects and demands that it should be, as mine was, of one of unbroken success. If it is not, you know what awaits. I have no wish to reduce the wholesome and realistic element of terror, the unremitting anxiety which must act as a lash and spur to your endeavors. How often you'll envy the humans their facility of sleep. Yet at the same time, I would wish to put before you a moderately encouraging view of the strategical situation as a whole. Your dreaded principal has included in a speech full of points something like an apology for the banquet which he has set before us. Well, gentle devils, no one blames him. but it'd be vain to deny that the human souls on whose anguish we have been feasting tonight were of pretty poor quality. Not all the most skillful cookery of our tormentors could make them better than insipid. Oh, to get one's teeth again in a Farinata, a Henry VIII, or even a Hitler. There's a real crackling there, something a crunch, a rage, an egotism, a cruelty, only just less robust than our own. It put up a delicious resistance to being devoured. It warmed your innards when you get it down. Instead of this, what we have tonight, there was a municipal authority with graft sauce. But personally, I could not detect in him the flavor of a really passionate and brutal avarice, such as delighted one in the great tycoons of the last century. Was he not unmistakably a little man, a creature of the petty rake-off, pocketed with a petty joke in private and denied with the stalest platitudes in his public utterances? A grubby little nonentity who had drifted into corruption, only just realizing that he was a corrupt, and chiefly because everyone else did it. Then there was a lukewarm casserole of adulterers. Could you find in it any trace of a fully inflamed, defiant, rebellious, insatiable lust? I couldn't. They all tasted to me like undersexed morons who had blundered or trickled into the wrong beds in automatic response to sexy advertisements, or to make themselves feel modern and emancipated, or to reassure themselves about their virility or their normalcy, or even because they had nothing else to do. Frankly, to me, who have tasted Messalina and Casanova, these were nauseating. The trade unionists garnished with claptrap was perhaps a shade better. He had done some real harm. He had, not quite unknowingly, worked for bloodshed, famine, and the extension of liberty. Yes, in a way, but what a way! He thought of those ultimate objectives so little. Towing the party line, self-importance, and above all, mere routine were what really dominated his life. But now comes the point. Gastronomically, all this is deplorable, but I hope none of us puts gastronomy first. Is it not, in another and far more serious way, full of hope and promise? Consider first the mere quantity. The quality may be wretched, but we never had souls of the sort in more abundance. And then the triumph. We are tempted to say that such souls or such residual puddles of once was soul are hardly worth damning. Yes, but the enemy, for whatever inscrutable and perverse reason, thought them worth trying to save. Believe me, he did. You youngsters have not been on active service, have no idea with what labor, with what delicate skill each of these little miserable creatures was finally captured. The difficulty lay in their smallness and flabbiness. Here were vermin so muddled in mind, so passively responsive to environment, that it was very hard to raise them to that level of clarity and deliberateness at which mortal sin becomes possible. To raise them just enough, but not over the fatal millimeter of too much. For then, of course, all would possibly have been lost. They might have seen, they might have repented. On the other hand, if they had been raised too little, they would very possibly have qualified for limbo, as creatures suitable neither for heaven nor hell. Things that, having failed to make the grade, are allowed to sink into a more or less contented subhumanity forever. And each individual choice of what the enemy would call the wrong turning such creatures are at first hardly, if at all, in a state of full spiritual responsibility. They do not understand either the source or the real character of the prohibitions they are breaking. Their consciousness hardly exists apart from the social atmosphere that surrounds them. And of course, we have contrived that their very language should be all smudge and blur. What would be a bribe in someone else's profession is a tip or present in theirs. The first job of their tempters was to harden these choices of the hell word rose into a habit by steady repetition. But then, and this is all important, to turn that habit into a principle the creature is prepared to defend. After that, all will go well. Conformity to the social environment, at first merely instinctive or even mechanical. How should a jelly not conform? Now becomes an unacknowledged creed of the ideal of togetherness or being like folks. Mere ignorance of the law they break now turns into a vague theory about it. Remember, they know no history. A theory expressed by calling it conventional or Puritan or bourgeois morality. Thus, gradually there comes to exist at the center of the creature a hard, tight-celled core of resolution to go on being what it is, and even to resist moods that might tend to alter it. It is a very small core, not at all reflective. They are too ignorant, nor defiant. Their emotional and imaginative poverty excludes that. Almost in its own way, prim and demure, like a pebble or a very young cancer, but it will serve our turn. Here at least is a real and deliberate, though not fully articulate, rejection of what the enemy calls grace. These, then, are two welcome phenomena. First, the abundance of our captures, however tasteless our fare, we are no longer in danger of famine. And secondly, the triumph, the skill of our tempters has never stood higher. But the third moral, which I have not yet drawn, is the most important of all. The sword of souls on whose despair and ruin we have, well, I won't say feasted, but at any rate subsisted tonight are increasing in numbers and will continue to increase. Our advices from lower command assure us that this is so. Our directives warn us to orient all our tactics in view of this situation. The great sinners, those in whom vivid and genial passions have been pushed beyond the bounds and in whom an immense concentration of will has been devoted to objects which the enemy abhors, will not disappear, but they will grow rarer. Our catches will be ever more numerous, but they will consist increasingly of trash. Trash we should have once thrown to the Cerberus and the hellhounds as unfit for diabolical consumption. And there are two things I want you to understand about this. First, that however depressing it may seem, it is really a change for the better. And secondly, I would draw your attention to the means by which it has been brought about. It is a change for a better. The great and toothsome sinners are made out of the very same material as those horrible phenomena, the great saints. The virtual disappearance of such material may mean insipid meals for us, but is it not utter frustration and famine for the enemy? He did not create the humans. He did not become one of them and die among them by torture in order to produce candidates for limbo, failed humans. He wanted to make saints, gods, things like himself. Is the dullness of your present fare not a small price to pay for the delicious knowledge that his whole great experiment is petering out? But not only that, as the great sinners grow fewer and the majority lose all individuality, the great sinners become far more effective agents for us. Every dictator or even demagogue, almost every film star or crooner can now draw tens of thousands of the human sheep with him. They give themselves, what there is of them, to him and him to us. There may come a time when we shall have no need to bother about individual temptation at all, except for the few. Catch the bellwether, and his whole flock comes after him. But do you realize how we have succeeded in reducing so many of the human race to the level of ciphers? This has not come about by accident. It has been our answer, and a magnificent answer it is. It is one of the most serious challenges we ever had to face. Let me recall to your minds what the human situation was in the latter half of the 19th century, the period at which I ceased to be a practicing tempter and was rewarded with an administrative post. The great movements toward liberty and equality among men had by then borne solid fruit and grown mature. Slavery had been abolished. The American War of Independence had been won. The French Revolution succeeded. Religious toleration was almost everywhere on the increase. In that moment, there had originally been many elements which were in our favor. Much atheism, much anti-clericalism, much envy and thirst for revenge, even some rather absurd attempts to revive paganism were mixed in with it. It was not easy to determine what our attitude should be. On the one hand, it was a bitter blow to us, it still is, that any sort of men who had been hungry should be fed, or any who had long worn chains should have them struck off. But on the other hand, there is in the movement so much rejection of faith, so much materialism, secularism, and hatred that we felt bound to encourage it. But by the latter part of the century, the situation was much simpler and much more ominous. In the English sector, where I saw most of my frontline service, a horrible thing had happened. The enemy, with his usual sleight of hand, had appropriated this progressive and liberalizing movement and perverted it to his own ends. Very little of its old anti-Christianity remained. The dangerous phenomenon called Christian socialism was rampant. Factory owners of the good old type who grew rich on sweated labor, instead of being assassinated by their work people, we could have used that, were being frowned upon by their own class. The rich were increasingly giving up their powers, not in the face of revolution or compulsion, but in obedience to their own consciousness. As for the poor who benefited by this, they were behaving in the most disappointing fashion. Instead of using their new liberties, as we reasonably hoped and expected, for massacre, rape, and looting, or even for perpetual intoxication, they were perversely engaged in becoming cleaner, more orderly, more thrifty, better educated, and even more virtuous. Believe me, gentle devils, the threat of something like a really healthy state of society seemed then perfectly serious. But thanks to our Father below, the threat was averted. Our counterattack was on two levels. On the deepest level, our dealers contrived to call into full life an element which had been implicit in the movement from its earliest days. Hidden in the heart of this striving for liberty, there is also deep hatred for personal freedom. That invaluable man, Rousseau, first revealed it. In his perfect democracy, remember, only the state religion is permitted. Slavery is restored, and the individual is told that he really has willed, though he didn't know it, whatever the government tells him to do. From that starting point, via Hegel, another indispensable propagandist on our side, we easily contrived both a Nazi and communist state. Even in England, we were pretty successful. I heard the other day that in that country, a man could not, without permit, cut down his own tree with his own axe, make it into planks with his own saw, and use the planks to build a tool shed in his own garden. Such was our counterattack on one level. You, who are mere beginners, will not be entrusted with work of that kind. You'll be attached as tempters to private persons. Against them or through them, our counterattack takes a different form. Democracy is a word with which you must lead them by the nose. The good work with which our philological experts have already done in the corruption of human language makes it unnecessary to warn you that they should never be allowed to give this word a clear and definable meaning. They won't. It will never occur to them that democracy is properly the name of a political system, even a system of voting, and that this is only the most remote and tenuous connection to what you're trying to sell them. Nor, of course, must they ever be allowed to raise Aristotle's question whether democratic behavior means the behavior that democracies like or the behavior that will preserve a democracy. For if they did, it could hardly fail to occur to them that these need not be the same. You are to use the word purely as an incantation, if you like, purely for its selling power. It is a name they venerate, and of course is connected with a political ideal that men should be equally treated. You then make a stealthy transition in their minds from this political ideal to a factual belief that all men are equal, especially men you are working on. As a result, you can use the word democracy to sanction in his thought the most degrading and also the least enjoyable of all human feelings. You can get him to practice, not only without shame, but with a positive glow of self-approval, conduct, which if undefended by the magic word would be universally derided. The feeling, I mean, of course, that which prompts a man to say is, I'm as good as you. The first and most obvious advantage is that thus you induce him to enthrone at the center of his life a good, solid, resounding lie. I don't mean merely that his statement is false, in fact, that he is no more equal to everyone else he meets in kindness, honesty, and good sense than in height or waist measurement. I mean that he does not believe it himself. No man who says, I'm as good as you, believes it. He would not say it if he did. The Saint Bernard never says to the toy dog, nor the scholar to the dunce, nor the employable to the bum, nor the pretty woman to the plain. The claim to equality outside the strictly political field is made only by those who feel themselves in some way inferior. What it expresses is precisely the itching, the smarching, the writhing awareness of an inferiority which the patient refuses to accept and therefore resents. Yes, and therefore resents every kind of superiority in others, denigrates it, wishes its annihilation. Presently, he suspects every mere difference of being a claim to superiority. No one must be different from himself in voice, clothes, manners, recreations, choice of food. Here is someone who speaks English rather more clearly and euphonically, I can't say that word, just more clear than I. It must be a vile, upstage, la-di-da affection. Here's a fellow who doesn't say he likes hot dogs, thinks himself too good for them, no doubt. Here's a man who hasn't turned on the jukebox. He must be one of those highbrows and is doing it to show off. If they were the right sort of chaps, they'd be like me. They have no business being different. It's undemocratic. Now, this useful phenomenon is in of itself by no means new. Under the name of envy, it has been known to the humans for thousands of years. But before then, they always regarded it as most odious and also the most comical of vices. Those who were aware of feeling it felt with shame. Those who were not gave it no quarter in others. Those who were not gave it no quarter in others. The delightful novelty of the present situation is that you can sanction it, make it respectable and even laudable by the incantatorial use of the word democratic. Under the influence of this incantation, those who are in any or every way inferior can labor wholeheartedly and successfully than they ever before to pull down everyone else to their level. But that is not all. Under the same influence, those who come or could come nearer to full humanity actually draw back from it for fear of being undemocratic. I am credibly informed that young humans now sometimes suppress an incipient taste for classical music or good literature because it might prevent their being like folks that people who would really wish to be or offer the grace with which would enable them to be honest, chaste, or temperate refuse it. To accept might make them different, might offend again the way of life, take them out of togetherness, impair their integration with a group. They might, horror of horrors, become individuals. All is summed up in the prayer which a young female human is said to have uttered recently. Oh God, make me a normal 20th century girl. Thanks to our labors, this will mean increasingly make me a minx, a moron, a parasite. Meanwhile, as a delightful byproduct, the fewer every day, who will not be made normal and regular and like folks and integrated, increasingly tend to become in reality the prigs and cranks, which the rabble would in any case have believed them to be. For suspicion often creates what it suspects. Since whatever I do, the neighbors are going to think of me as a witch or a communist agent, I might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb and become one in reality. As a result, we now have an intelligentsia which, though very small, is a very useful cause to hell, which is very useful to the cause of hell. But that is a mere byproduct. What I want to fix your attention on is a vast overall movement towards the discrediting and finally the elimination of every kind of human excellence, moral, cultural, social, intellectual. And it's not pretty to notice, and is it not pretty to notice how democracy is now doing for us the work that was once done by the most ancient dictatorships and by the same methods? You remember how the Greek dictators, they called them tyrants then, sent an envoy to another dictator to ask his advice about the principles of government. The second dictator led the envoy into a field of corn, and there he snicked off with his cane the top of every stalk that rose an inch or so above the general level. The moral was plain. Allow no preeminence among your subjects. Let no man live who is wiser or better or more famous or even handsomer than the mass. Cut them all down to a level. All slaves, all ciphers, all nobodies, all equals. Thus tyrants could practice, in a sense, democracy. But now democracy can do the same work without any other tyranny other than our own. No one need go through the field with a cane. The little stalks are now of themselves bite the tops of the big ones. The big ones are beginning to bite off their own to their desire to be like stalks. I have said that to secure the damnation of these little souls, these creatures have almost ceased to be individuals. It's a laborious and tricky work, but if proper pains and skill are expended, you can be fairly confident of the result. The great sinners seem easier to catch, but then they are incalculable. After you've played them for 70 years, the enemy may snatch them from your claws in the 71st. They are capable, you see, of real repentance. They are conscious of real guilt. They are, if things take the wrong turn, as ready to defy the social pressures around them for the enemy's sake as they were to defy them for ours. It is in some ways more troublesome to track and swat an invasive wasp than to shoot at close range a wild elephant. The elephant is more troublesome if you miss. My own experience, as I said, was mainly on the English sector, and I still get more news from it than any other. It may be that what I'm now going to say will not apply so fully to the sectors in which some of you may be operating, but you can make the necessary adjustments when you get there. Some application it will almost certainly have. If it is too little, you must labor to make the country you are dealing with more like what England already is. In that promising land, the spirit of I'm as good as you has become something more than a generally social influence. It begins to work itself in their educational system. How far its operations there have gone at the present moment, I would not like to say with certainty, nor does it matter. Once you've grasped the tendency, you can easily predict its future developments, especially as we ourselves will play into the developing. The basic principle of the new education is to be that dunces and idlers must not be made to feel inferior to intelligent, industrious pupils. That would be undemocratic. These differences between pupils, for they are obviously and nakedly individual differences, must be disguised. This can be done on various levels. At universities, examinations must be framed so that nearly all the good students get good marks. Entrance examinations must be framed so that all or nearly all citizens can go to universities, whether they have any power or wish to profit by higher education or not. At schools, the children who are too stupid or lazy to learn languages and mathematics and elementary science can be set to be doing things that children used to do in their spare time. Let them, for example, make mud pies and call it modeling. But all the time, there must be no faintest hint that they are inferior to the children who are actually doing the work. Whatever nonsense they are engaged in must have, I believe, the English already used the phrase parity of esteem. An even more drastic scheme is not impossible. Children who are fit to proceed to a higher class may be artificially kept back because the others would get a trauma. Beelzebub, what a useful word, by being left behind. The bright pupil thus remains democratically fettered to his own age group throughout his school career, and a boy who would be capable of tackling Dante or Aeschylus sits listening to his Colville's attempts to spell out a cat on the mat. In a word, we may reasonably hope the virtual abolition of education when I'm as good as you has fully had its way. All incentives to learn and all penalties for not learning will vanish. The few who might want to learn will be prevented. Who are they to overtop their fellows? And anyway, the teachers, or should I say nurses, will be far too busy reassuring the dunces and patting them on the back to waste any time on real teaching. We should no longer have to plan and toil to spread imperturbable conceit and incurable ignorance among men. The little vermin will do it for us. Of course, this would not follow unless all education became state education, but it will. That is part of the same movement. Penal taxes designed for that purpose are liquidating the middle class, the class who are prepared to save and spend and make sacrifices in order to have their children privately educated. The removal of this class, besides linking up with the abolition of education, is fortunately an inevitable effect of the spirit that says, I'm as good as you. This was, after all, the social group which gave to the humans the overwhelming majority of their scientists, physicians, philosophers, theologians, poets, artists, composers, architects, jurists, and administrators. If ever there was a bunch of tall stocks and neither tops knocked off, it was surely they, the middle class. As an England politician remarked not long ago, a democracy does not want great men. It would be idle to ask of such a creature, whether by want it means need or like, but you had better be clear, for here Aristotle's question comes up again. I'm just going to we're almost done here, and I'm just going to finish up. We in hell would welcome the disappearance of democracy in the strict sense of the word, the political arrangement so-called. Like all forms of government, it often works to our advantage, but on the whole, less often than other forms. And what we must realize is that democracy, in the diabolical sense, I'm as good as you, being like folks, togetherness, is the finest instrument we could possibly have for extirpating political democracies from the face of the earth. For democracy, or the democratic spirit, diabolical sense, leads to a nation without great men, a nation mainly of subliterates, morally flaccid from lack of discipline in youth, full of cocksureness which flattery breeds on ignorance, and soft from lifelong pampering. And that is what hell wishes every democratic people to be. For when such a nation meets in conflict, a nation where children have been made to work at school, whose talent is placed in high post, and where the ignorant mass are allowed no say at all in public affairs, only one result is possible. One democracy was surprised lately when it found that Russia had got ahead of it in science. What a delicious specimen of human blindness. If the whole tendency of their society is opposed to every sort of excellence, what do they expect their science? How do they expect their scientists to excel? It is our function to encourage the behavior, the manners, the whole attitude of mind which democracies naturally like and enjoy, because these are the very things which, left unchecked, will destroy democracy. You'd almost wonder that even humans don't see it themselves. Even if they don't read Aristotle, that would be undemocratic, of course. You would have thought the French Revolution would have taught them the behavior aristocrats naturally like is not the behavior that preserves their aristocracy. They might have even applied the same principles to all form of government. But I would not end on that note. I would not, hell forbid, encourage in your own minds that delusion which you must carefully foster in the minds of your human victims. I mean, the delusion that the fate of nations is, in of itself, more important than that of individual souls. The overthrow of free peoples and the multiplication of slave states are for us a means, besides, of course, being fun, but the real end is the destruction of individuals, for only individuals can be saved or damned, can become enemies of the state or food for us. The ultimate value for us of any revolution, war, or famine lies in the individual anguish, treachery, hatred, rage, and despair which it may produce. I'm as good as you as useful means for the destruction of democratic societies, but it has far deeper value as an end of it itself. As a state of mind which necessarily excluding humility, charity, contentment, and the pleasures of gratitude and admiration, turns a human being away from almost every road which he might finally lead him to heaven. But now, for the pleasantness part of my duty, it falls to my lot to propose on behalf of the guests the health of Principal Slubgob and the Tempter's Training College. Fill your glasses. What is this I see? What is this delicious bouquet I inhale? Can it be, Mr. Principal? Mr. Principal, I unsay all my hard words about the dinner. I see and smell that even under wartime conditions, the college cellar still has a few dozen of sound old vintage Pharisee. Well, this is like old times. Hold it beneath your nostrils for a moment, gentle devils. Hold it up to the light. Look at those fiery streaks that writhe and tangle in its dark heart, as if they're contending, and so they are. You know how this wine is blended. Different types of Pharisee have been harvested, trodden, and fermented together to produce a subtle flavor. Types that were more antagonistic to one another on earth. Some were all rules and relics and rosaries. Others were all drab clothes, long faces, and petty traditional abstinences from wine or cards or theater. Both had in common their self-righteousness and the almost infinite distance between their actual outlook and anything the enemy really is or commands. The wickedness of other religions was a really live doctrine in the religion of each. Slander was his gospel, and denigration his litany. How they hated each other upon where the sun shone. How much more they hate each other now that they're forever conjoined but not reconciled. Their astonishment, their resentment at the combination, the festering of the eternally impotent spite, passing into our spiritual digestion will work like fire. Dark fire. All said and done, my friends, it will be an ill day for us if what most humans be my religion ever vanishes from earth. It can still send us truly delicious sins. The fine flower of unholiness can grow only in the close neighborhood of the holy. Nowhere do we tempt so successfully as on the very steps of the altar. Your eminence, your disgraces, my thorns, shadies, and gentle devils, I give you the toast of Principal Slubgob in the college. Man, what can I say? That is just... keep your individuality, my friend. Your individuality is what devil hates. He hates it, he hates it, he hates it. And he will do whatever he can to separate you from you who you are individual. Always remember, regardless of your religious thoughts, and this is for Christians, that Jesus died for all individuals. He did not die for a group. God wants a personal relationship, not with groups, but with individuals. It matters not who you are, where you're from, what your skin color is, what your religion is. God wants that personal relationship with you. He sent his son to be tortured on the cross, not for your group, but for you, your personal individualism. That's who he loves and wants to have a personal relationship with you. When you sacrifice that, you're sacrificing your soul. Don't do it. All right. I'm going to leave off with a Matthew West song. What's the song called again? It's called The Healing Has Begun. Oh, man. If you need you might want to wash that dust in your eye when you hear this song, because it's fantastic. It is fantastic. And if you ever need a reminder that the sins you've committed, God could care less. He just wants you to say, you know something, God, I am sorry. Please forgive me. And the happiness that comes from those sins, the scars that you have, don't hide them. Show them. Other people need your scars. They need to see them, because that will show them that their scars they can be proud of too. It's a wonderful song. So it'll get you teary-eyed, I guarantee. But so does the Screwtape Letters, man. It gets you teary-eyed because you look at it and you say, man, oh man, oh man. All right. With that said, we'll end this podcast episode today. Hope you find this helpful. heritagewealthplanning.com. Don't forget to go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com, Heritage Wealth Planning. On Facebook as well, facebook.com, Heritage Wealth Planning. And we'll see you next time on the Josh Galen Podcast. Thanks, guys.